Our gospel reading for this night comes from John, the 13th chapter. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For Jesus knew who was going to betray him, and that is why he said, not every one was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" Jesus asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth. No servant is greater than his master, nor messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will only be with you a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now. Where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Here ends our gospel reading. Tonight is Maundy, Thursday. The word Maundy means command in Latin. So tonight is Command Thursday. This night we look back to the great command that Jesus gave to the disciples, to love one another as he loves. It is a great command, a challenging command that calls us to be humble. Humble just like Christ, who washed the disciples' feet. This love, this grand love that Jesus calls us to have, is not a love that's worried about rank or position, who is in charge or who can get an advantage. This love is self-serving. It's a love that does not end. It is the love that Jesus has for us. On this Thursday long ago, Jesus and the disciples met for the Passover feast, what we would come to know as the Last Supper, for it would be the last meal they had together that week. Jesus knew what would come. Of course, the disciples, they didn't know what it would be. It was just a celebration, a Passover celebration like so many before. The disciples, they walked into the upper room, all things prepared for the Passover feast. And as they walked in, they passed a towel and a basin. Two important things for life in Israel at that time. Because, of course, people didn't have shoes like us. They wore sandals or no shoes at all. So, of course, their feet would get dirty on the dusty roads, the unpaved areas that existed. If someone were to go into a house or a room, they would have to wash their feet. A house that was wealthy would have a servant there to take that towel and basin and wash the feet of those who entered. The disciples long ago, they entered the upper room, and they all passed the towel and the basin, a sign of a servant. Now all the disciples walked by the towel and the basin, and I'm sure they looked at it. Some of them may have wondered where the servant was to wash feet, or who might wash feet. Though I doubt any of the disciples thought that they might wash each other's feet. They might know the lessons and remember all that Jesus taught about being servants, about how the last shall be first and the first shall be last, of loving service in life. Maybe Peter walked by that basin thinking somebody should wash his feet because he walked on water with Jesus. He's the first one to declare that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Maybe Andrew walked by the towel in the basin thinking that somebody should wash his feet because he was one of the first disciples of Jesus. He introduced others that were part of the 12 core disciples to Jesus in the first place. Maybe Thomas walked by, doubting that anybody would wash anybody's feet. Those who went into the upper room didn't think about that. Didn't think such a simple act of washing one another's feet. But Jesus, of course, after the meal, he did. He took off his outer robe and he poured water into the basin and proceeded to wash the disciples' feet. He did this humble act that none of the disciples would do for each other. He did this humble act, I'm sure confusing many what he was doing because they called him Master and Lord. But here Jesus was, being a humble servant. Of course, we read about Peter objecting to Jesus when Jesus got to Peter to wash his feet. But Peter didn't understand, something that Jesus knew he later would. Because Peter would eventually understand the life of a humble servant. How in God's kingdom, the ones who are important, the ones who are great, are those who serve. There is a rather large church. It has about 3,000 members. And as you could imagine, a church that large, there's a lot of people who are sick at a given time or those who are shut-ins. A program was started so people within the church could take communion and also visit those who, of course, were ill or the shut-ins. Now, this program is, of course, a program that is made up of people, volunteers that don't worry about rank or position or how important they might look in the congregation because they give their time, they give of themselves in this program. Jesus calls us to humble service. That is our lives as Christians. And I'm sure you as a Christian have lived that humble service, have lived that humble service that blessed so many by giving yourselves. Not worried about rank or position, not being a person who thinks, how will this get me ahead? No, you give of yourself. True service, truly in the way of Jesus. Jesus, who commands us this night. I give you a new command, that you love one another as I have loved you. You should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This command was probably not too surprising to the disciples after what Jesus had just done. Stooping down and washing their feet, being that humble servant. Jesus models the way of servanthood. Live that way in your life and resist sin. Sin that guides us to not be servants, to not stoop down and do what another needs, to not stoop down and lose rank or position. Resist that sin and know well the love of Christ this night. A love shown well in such simple things. A towel and a basin. Know this humble love and all Christ will do, especially on Friday. Amen.